The events of the Exodus appear in every history book that I've ever read. They don't agree on the date. They can be from 1500 BC to 1200 BC. But the only actual evidence of the Exodus is in the Torah, or the Bible. And there are several books dedicated to it, Exodus and Numbers being the most important. And they're the only evidence to show that this event ever happened. If it is a historical, archaeological event, it should be very easy to prove. Unfortunately, we've had archaeologists digging up the entire Middle East for the last 200 years, and what they found is very sparse to prove that this actually happened. I know you are not able to prove a negative, but the lack of evidence for Exodus seems to prove that maybe it didn't happen after all. The most important part of the story is the 400 years of slavery that the Hebrews did in Egypt. According to the book of Numbers, there are 603,000 Hebrew males leaving Egypt for the Exodus, which, if you expand to women and children, can be anywhere from 2 to 6 million people. The population of Egypt at around 1200 to 1500 BC was around 7 million people. So that means that this would be a large chunk of the population. Anywhere between 25 and 75% of the population of Egypt was picking up and leaving. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of Hebrew slaves in Egypt. There is no evidence of anyone buying one. There's no evidence of anyone selling one. There's no evidence of anyone bragging about tomb walls of how many they own. So if you're looking for the Hebrews in Egypt, you're not going to find them. The next problem with finding evidence for Exodus is the 10th plague. There have been many scientists who have tried to show you how any of the plagues could have happened naturally, locusts, frogs, all that stuff. But the 10th plague is something entirely different. According to Exodus 11:4-6, the 10th plague is a devastation that happened to Egypt. The angel of death came into Egypt and literally killed all the firstborn children in the land of Egypt. And it wasn't just humans, it was all of the firstborn children. This was dramatic in the Ten Commandments movie, but it doesn't seem to have dedicated any writing to. There is no mass graves, there is no mass deaths, there is no people writing about this at all. It's as if it never happened. The events of the 10th plague happened in the world today, there would be a huge outcry. The media would be everywhere. People would be lamenting it all over. And this doesn't seem to have happened in Egypt, which is strange, considering what would happen if it happened now. The next evidence is the Sinai desert itself. The Sinai desert is very, very dry. It hasn't rained there in about 11,000 years. They can tell where Bedouins have camped overnight thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. So if 2 million people were going through the Sinai, there would be evidence that they would have left behind. The first would be the most simple ones. There would be latrines, there would be dead bodies, there would be dead animals, there would be kitchens. There would be things that normal people would do on the way there. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that 2 million people, or even 200,000 people, or even 2,000 people had gone through the desert in this way. There is no latrines, there is no kitchens, there is no dead bodies. If 2 million people had gone through Sinai, that would be double the population of Rome at its height. Rome at its height, population was about 1 million people. So this would be double the population of Rome, traveling through an arid desert and leaving no evidence that they had done so. The next evidence to show that Exodus didn't happen is the Egyptian occupation of Canaan. If you look at a map, Canaan is now where modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria are. And Egypt occupied these lands from around 2000 BC to around 1150 BC. And they did this strategically because all of the invasions of Egypt came from this way. So if they had their troops out in front of them, they would see this coming, or that they could repel them. So Canaan and those areas were occupied by Egypt. When the Exodus is over and they've gone back through the desert and they've done their 40 years, they go back into Canaan and they genocide everyone there and take over their land. What the writers were unaware of is that when they left Egypt, they actually landed back in Egypt. And we know that Egypt was occupying this lands because of the El Amarna tablets that we've found that show that from Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, which became Akhenaten, that Egypt occupied these lands. Also, the great pharaohs of Ramses, Merneptah, and even Ramses III came into these lands to reoccupy them and to reestablish order. The Ramses III was the last great pharaoh to do this, and that was 1150 BC. So all the events of Exodus had to have taken place after 1150 BC. And that is just not possible with the chronological events that happen within the Bible, because David appears at about 1000 BC. Next is the Merneptah Stela. The Merneptah Stela is a bragging of the pharaoh Merneptah about his invasion to reestablish order in the province of Canaan. We can date this to about 1207 BC. Merneptah was the son of Ramses the Great, or Ramses the Second, and he has a whole wall bragging about his invasion of Canaan and what he did. It is also the first time in history that the Israelites are mentioned. But they're not mentioned as a people, they're not mentioned as a city-state. They're mentioned as a tribe, and he wiped them out. And that's it. That's all it says. Which is kind of funny because this event is not mentioned in the Bible. So it's a historical event for the Egyptians, but it doesn't seem to have appeared in the Bible. And it also makes it sound as if the tribe of Israel were bandits and they were messing with the Egyptian trade routes. So he just wiped them out. If the Bible, or the Torah, was written by Moses, it was written in a language that hadn't existed yet. The Bible, or the Torah, was supposedly written by Moses in 1400 BC. The problem is that we don't have Hebrew is not that old. The first existence of Hebrew is the real Hebrew that we have now is dated back to about 700 to 800 BC. Paleo-Hebrew, which is a little bit older than that, can go back to about 1000 BC, which is about the time of David and Solomon. So the Torah is written in a language that hadn't been written down yet, or he hadn't even evolved yet. So the story is definitely told after the events happen. Finally, there is the problem with Moses. Many people have been searching for him throughout history. He's mentioned in all the timelines, he's mentioned in all the history books. The problem is he doesn't seem to exist. Archaeologists, or the people who support the biblical story, can support this because the Egyptians have a problem with trying to erase history. The problem with that is when you erase history from stone, you leave evidence. There are many examples of pharaohs trying to erase history, but the problem is they hack the writing, and they hack the stone. They can't really replace it with anything. So there is evidence to show what was hacked and why it's gone. There doesn't seem to be any Moses or Exodus hackings in all of Egypt. So it's kind of hard to show where Moses is and how historical he was. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to support the Torah biblical story for Exodus, which leads me to believe that Exodus didn't happen.